Wonderful. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Eric Patterson. I serve as president and CEO of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation in Washington, D.C., and we're delighted that you could join us for a few moments as we re-kick off for this Congress the Victims of Communism Congressional Caucus, a bipartisan coalition of members of Congress who are committed to fighting totalitarianism and these communist ideologies and practices, not just in the past, but in the present today. And let me thank the Congress for their leadership all the way back to the 1950s on bipartisan resolutions against communism. Many people don't realize that in 1956, the co-founder of the Victims of Communism Foundation, Lev Dobryansky, worked with Congress to pass the first statements against what were called the captive nations, the Soviet Union, China, and other countries at the time. And Congress consistently, and then the executive consistently, passed annual captive nations legislation or statements all the way up to the present day. In 1993, the Congress unanimously passed an act that established what became the nonprofit educational organization that I lead, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and our museum here in Washington, D.C. And that bipartisan cooperation has continued through the last Congress with the passing in the House of the crucial Communism Teaching Act, and that's back in the House. It'll be come back up very, very shortly. So we couldn't do it, though, without leadership like these two congresspeople, Congressman Wilson and Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So I just want to say thank you. And I also want to say that the mission of VOC, this mission to educate all generations about the enduring crimes and legacy of communism, and to be an advocate for people still held by communist tyranny today. 1.5 billion people still today in China, North Korea, Cuba, and elsewhere. It's an enduring mission, but we couldn't do it without leadership like these two. So allow me to turn it over to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate your kind introduction. I am Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz from the great state of Florida, and I am so grateful to be joined by my friend Joe Wilson to relaunch the Congressional Victims of Communism Caucus for the 119th Congress. This caucus is dedicated to the countless millions of souls who suffered or perished under communist regimes and those who continue to languish under authoritarian rule to this day. As co-chair, I aim to ensure that this caucus will bring justice to the memories of those who have been lost and give voice to those who are still suffering in forced silence. And I hope we can provide a platform for bipartisan cooperation on key policies to educate Americans on the human toll of communism in the 20th century. To defend human rights and democracy worldwide against repression and emerging threats, and to build our capacity to compete with China and other adversaries that threaten freedom and our way of life. Congressman Wilson has demonstrated true leadership in pursuing these objectives throughout his career, and I'm so glad we can work together to achieve these goals. I'm also grateful for the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation's partnership and support for our caucus. For 3 decades, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation has led the charge in this essential work, authorized by Congress and signed into law by President Clinton. Through research, advocacy, and the curation of the Victims of Communism Museum, the Foundation continues to fulfill its mission to educate future generations on the tragic history of communist abuses. They played a vital role in amplifying the stories of the more than 100 million lives lost to communism and the over 1 billion people who still lack the political freedoms and individual rights we hold so dear. And Dr. Patterson, I'm glad to have you here to guide us as we relaunch the caucus into action. Now, I know that some of my constituents might ask, why now? The Cold War is over. But those in my district whose families came from Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua already know the answer. Communism is not a relic of the past. It remains a present-day threat to freedom, human dignity, and global stability. More than 1.5 billion people, as Eric mentioned, still live under communist regimes, subjected to state control and oppression. The dangers of communism are not confined to history books. They are shaping world affairs today. They span from China's mass internment of Uyghurs and suppression of democracy in Hong Kong to Cuba's ongoing repression and North Korea's brutal dictatorship. For Americans, understanding the consequences of communist rule is more than just an academic exercise. These regimes actively undermine our democracy, suppress free enterprise, and pose direct challenges to our national security. The Chinese Communist Party steals our intellectual property, spies on Americans, and bullies our allies, all while spreading disinformation to weaken democracies, including our own. Cuba and Venezuela remain destabilizing forces in our own hemisphere, threatening regional security and driving a massive refugee crisis. Beyond ideological lines, we've seen dictatorships around the world adopting the repressive and aggressive tactics pioneered by their communist predecessors. Russia's violent crackdown on dissent and its war of aggression against Ukraine. Iran's state surveillance, sponsorship of terrorism, and use of propaganda to control its people. These regimes echo the worst abuses of 20th century communism. Even in non-communist states, we see governments silencing opposition, restricting fundamental freedoms, and using state-sponsored violence to cling to power. We can overcome these threats to human rights if we understand their origins. The Victims of Communism Caucus is crucial to ensuring that future generations never forget the lessons of history and never repeat its horrors. It is our responsibility to amplify the voices of those who have suffered under communism, support dissidents and pro-democracy movements, and counter autocrats threatening freedom across the globe. To me, that means restoring programs like Voice of America and Radio Marti, which provide truthful reporting to counter disinformation in nations that close off access to objective news. It means resuming support for pro-democracy organizers and freeing political prisoners in Venezuela and Cuba. It means bolstering our democratic allies from Taiwan to Ukraine to Guyana who face the threat of aggression. And it means urging our colleagues to lead with strong, effective, and compassionate governance as a model for the world. By launching this caucus, we reaffirm America's commitment to resisting autocratic regimes whose actions are incompatible with the values we cherish. The fight for freedom continues, and I hope that my Democratic and Republican colleagues will join Congressman Wilson and myself to meet this moment. I'm confident the Victims of Communism Caucus can and will serve as a home base for this generational struggle against oppression. Thank you so much for having me.
You're here.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend from South Carolina, Joe Wilson.
And thank you very much, co-chairwoman, and what an honor to be here with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And it's so meaningful for her to be here because she has such a constituency of people who've had to flee Cuba to see the totalitarian state, to see the people who've had to flee Venezuela as a dictatorship is emerging in Nicaragua. So just by being here with her, she lives this every day, and that is that we need to never forget the atrocities of communism. And then I'm really grateful to be here with Hunter Yoon. Hunter his heritage is Korean, and there's no better example of the contrast between the success of democratic capitalism and the failure of communism than the Korean Peninsula. And so I am the only member of Congress who's actually had the opportunity to visit Pyongyang, North Korea. I saw the oppression. And then you go to South Korea and you see one of the wealthiest countries on earth, and a country that was ashes. And now South Korea is such a dynamic and positive influence, but you just need to look at a map and pictures. You need to look up the picture of the Korean Peninsula at night. And that is that at the 39th parallel south, it's vibrant with electrical impulses of every kind. And then if you look to the north of the 39th parallel, it looks like there's nothing there. That it's but between the 39th parallel and the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, it looks like an ocean. No, that's where the oppressed people of North Korea live. And so, indeed, it should never be forgotten that as we're facing history and the horrors of communism, it still is present, and we want to give hope to the people who are oppressed around the world. Communist atrocities of mass murder should never be forgotten. I'm grateful to be here with my co-chairman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Florida, and Dr. Eric Patterson, the president and CEO of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, to announce the relaunch of the Victims of Communism Caucus. This caucus is much needed to remind all of us of being an anti-communism supporter, to oppose communism. It's not left, right, or center. It's a moral imperative about fighting for freedom against the ideology that is objectively evil and continues to oppress more than 1.5 billion people around the world. The fight is among all of us who value liberty, justice, and historical truth. The atrocities of communism must never be forgotten. Over the last century, communism has resulted in the deaths of more than 100 million people worldwide, not in war, but through starvation, labor camps, purges, firing squads, and total state controls. They were not unfortunate side effects. They were the features of the system itself, hallmarks of an ideology built on lies and enforced by terror. I have my whole life been so inspired by the courage of people resisting communism. Really, for me, it began in 1956 to see people standing in front of Soviet tanks in Budapest, and then to meet heroes like Congressman Tom Lantos, who grew up in Budapest and had to face what was occurring at that time. And from that, we now have the circumstance of having, and to me, the patriots of Cuba that so often in 1961 have stood up for freedom and democracy. And additionally, I'm really grateful that I was involved in a political campaign in 1963 with Barry Goldwater. Why not victory? And the point of this is to victory over worldwide communism. And as a teenage volunteer for the Goldwater campaign, it was unique. In fact, something that Ms. Wasserman Schultz knows, Hillary Clinton was a Goldwater girl in Illinois. And so we just know that what Barry Goldwater proposed, which Ronald Reagan was ultimately able to achieve, and that is victory over communism. And some would like to reframe communism as a noble idea gone wrong, a utopian dream that simply failed in execution. History is clear. Communism has failed not because of poor implementation, but because it's inherently flawed. It denies human nature, it denies the dignity of the individual, and it denies the moral foundations of a free society. I have lived with my colleagues to have the opportunity to be an election observer in 1990 in Bulgaria, where I saw in the first post-communist election the dream that I had of freedom for the people of Bulgaria all the way to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Additionally, I'm grateful that while I was there, I had the opportunity to visit the destroyed Berlin Wall in Berlin, and then from there I visited Moscow, and sadly I visited Yekaterinburg. I've been to Novosibirsk. Chelyabinsk is a sister city of my hometown, Columbia, South Carolina. I've been to St. Petersburg visiting with dear friends, and over and over again I had an opportunity, and how sad it is that war criminal Putin has set back the people of the Russian Federation and made it so impossible for the people of Russia who are oppressed themselves. And sadly, war criminal Putin is trying to resurrect the Soviet Union. And we see that as he has rigged elections in Belarus, as he has rigged the elections in the Republic of Georgia, where indeed President Salome Zurabishvili was legally elected, but due to rigged elections, she was not able to take office because of war criminal Putin. And then we also see that war criminal Putin has invaded Ukraine, and he makes it very clear Ukraine doesn't exist because he still thinks of it as part of the failed Soviet Union. He also invaded, as we know, Georgia itself, and then maintains troops illegally in Moldova. And so the planning is clear, and we must stand up to resist, and we can be successful. Last December, the dictatorship that he backed up in Syria collapsed. And so it's very clear President Assad fled from Damascus and is now living in where he should be. He's in Moscow. And so putting that in perspective, the new transition government of Syria, we should be working with to help them develop a free society. And I'm just so hopeful for the people of Damascus. But they're a clear example that just as the Soviet Union collapsed, so did the dictatorship in Syria. And with that hope, history proves that communist totalitarianism can be overcome. And again, I was able to see the unanticipated implosion of the Soviet Union, where dozens of countries now are free, some that didn't even exist. Like Slovenia, those of us who appreciate Melania Trump, President Trump's wife herself has come from a former Yugoslav republic that's now free. The Iron Curtain was torn down not by tanks, but by the courage of individuals who dared to speak the truth of tyranny. From Václav Havel to the brave citizens of Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine, we could go on, to Central Asia, and how grateful we are for Kazakhstan and Armenia, and the Caucasus. It just goes on. Countries that were not free, but they are now, and we can be positive. A hope of overcoming communist totalitarianism is historically vindicated with the unanticipated implosion of the totalitarian state in dozens of countries, and tens of millions of people now live in freedom and can travel and be able to have fulfilling lives, and for the young people in particular can have meaningful lives. And so I want to thank Dr. Patterson. I want to thank my co-chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We look forward to, indeed, reminding people in history of the danger of the Soviet Union and the danger of being resurrected and the dangers of communism. Thank you.
Well, with that, I thank you for your attendance at this event today, and my sincere thanks to the Congressman and the Congresswoman for their support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Patterson.
We must get a good picture now. Here.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I've never seen Debbie look quite this way.
Israel's genocide? What about the victims of Israel's genocide? They're